Tonight on Insights on PBS Hawaii. We'll look at the road ahead for the University of Hawaii as it emerges from the Stevie Wonder blunder aftermath. How is the university improving oversight, refocusing on its strategic goals, and bolstering programs and initiatives to advance the state's economy? Now, live in our studio, our host, Dan Boylan.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Dan Boylan. The University of Hawaii's handling of last summer's Stevie Wonder concert scam resulted in a call for reforms in its governance and operations. The state legislature is now considering measures to improve oversight and transparency at the university. How are the university leaders themselves addressing the question of accountability? More important, what progress has been made to meet the strategic goals of one of the largest institutions in the state? 10 campuses spread over 4 islands, enrolling over 60,000 students. In a rapidly changing global environment, what role does the University of Hawaii play in developing and disseminating knowledge? How is the curriculum evolving in order to train our future workforce? And what new programs promise economic growth and job creation for Hawaii's people? Joining us in our studio is the president of the university, a member of the Board of Regents, and 2 education advocates, I'm calling them. We also invite you to join the conversation by calling in, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Or you can join our live blog. The contact information you now see on your screen will be shown regularly throughout the program. Insights is also streaming live on your computer and will be posted on our website after the broadcast. Now to our panel. M.R.C. Greenwood became the 14th president of the University of Hawaii in August 2009 and is the first woman to serve as UH's chief executive officer. She has also served as provost and senior vice president for academic affairs for the University of California System and as chancellor of the University of California, Santa Cruz. President Greenwood graduated from Vassar College and received her PhD from the Rockefeller University. They're not the University of Hawaii, but they're okay schools. John Holtzman is one of the 15 members on the University of Hawaii Board of Regents, the governing body of the University of Hawaii system. The Regents are nominated by the Regents Candidate Advisory Council, appointed by the governor, and confirmed by the legislature. They serve for staggered terms without compensation. John is a retired diplomat with extensive experience in the Asia-Pacific and Middle East regions. Alan Uyeda is the president and CEO of First Insurance Company of Hawaii. He has focused his community service on improving public education and creating a more knowledge-based economy. As chair of the Hawaii Business Roundtable, Alan has worked to build links between the university's research and development activities and businesses both here and abroad. Leslie Wilkins is Vice President and Director of Workforce and Education Programs for the Maui Economic Development Board, a nonprofit dedicated to achieving balanced economy for its communities of Maui, Lanai, and Molokai. Leslie also chairs the Hawaii State Commission on the status of women. I'm not going to talk about the status of women tonight, I don't think. We'll try to stay away from that one. But I do want to talk about the Hawaii Innovation Initiative, because I know it is a major concern of yours and one that you see as the future of the university over the next 10 years. Could you give it to us in a nutshell?
Okay, well, in a nutshell, what the Hawaii Innovation Initiative is striving to do is to build that third leg of the economy that the state of Hawaii so badly needs. All the economic analyses that have been presented at the Roundtable and in other public forums show that we are balanced delicately on 2 major industries, if you will, tourism and the military. We need to grow the pie. We need to build another sector. And we have a pretty flourishing sector in the university with the $500 million research industry that we've built. And we've done that over a decade with a lot of other challenges to do, and we'd like to double it. And we believe that if we do double it, it'll create between around 8,000 new well-paying jobs in the state of Hawaii for people who live here, and it'll be a good place for your kids to work once they get their degree from the University of Hawaii. So that's the core of it. I can discuss more details if you want more, Dan.
But as I understand it, you hope to achieve this this $1 billion in research money by 2022, so a 10-year, over a 10-year period.
Another 10-year period. Although if you talk to some of our supporters, they want us to do it in 5 or 6 years. I'm just being a bit more realistic. Yeah.
I mean, we've last few weeks around here, we've talked about, you know, what impact on the Hawaii's economy will come from the death of Senator Inoue.
Yeah.
What's the impact on the state economy from sequestration and the likelihood that we're going to see more cuts in federal budget over the next 10 years. A lot of our money, how can this be? How can we somehow or another double our research money in that time?
Well, one of the things that we did learn from Senator Inoue was sort of the academic analogy to you can give a man a fish or you can teach a man to fish. And what I believe the senator did for the university was to teach us how to be competitive and how to bring our own resources to the state. Now, I think you're right. I think that the federal picture is going to be a little tough, but we are still going to do research. If you look at what a lot of the major industry people say about what the country has to do to maintain its economic position, we have got to do research. We have got to educate people to be able to create new things. We've got to be able to carry this global economy in our states. And Hawaii is very well positioned to be able to gain not just from our own economy, but from the growing economies in the Asia-Pacific region. You know, we're better positioned than many states for building the partnerships, not just student exchange partnerships, but real, genuine strategic partnerships with governments and other universities.
And a lot of these researchers bring in grants, maybe bring in $10 to $20 million so that they will help grow the economy. It's not a drain on the economy, it's a building of the economy. And the business community has also tried to support M.R.C. For example, the Cancer Center and High Care have gotten about $17 million from HPH, Queens, and Kuakini. High Care.
It's a fund. It's an investment fund for the research.
So that
here
helps
in Hawaii, by Hawaiian.
That helps pay for these researchers who then help educate the next generation doctors, provide world-class care, and also lead research teams.
John mentioned Asia and Pacific region. Do you agree there's great opportunities for collaboration?
There's absolutely great opportunities for great collaboration, and we have done some already. For example, in Vietnam, and we're especially strong in North Asia, China, and Korea and Japan, and in Indonesia, and we're looking also now at South Asia. So yes, there's fantastic opportunities for us there. I'd like to add once more on the research dollars, is that each time we do get one of these research grants, there's a multiplier for our economy. And so that's creating jobs in and of itself. And so that's not to be forgotten either.
Leslie, you folks over on Maui have been working at this for a while, and you have been trying to do exactly that, to try to balance away from tourism and agriculture, which is, I guess there's one plantation left in the middle of Maui.
We do, and it's on Maui, the Central Plain, absolutely, CNS.
But how successful have you been?
Well, I think we've made big inroads, and as a member of the economic development community, we're absolutely thrilled about the Hawaii Innovation Initiative because, as you mentioned, it aligns with our mission to help diversify the economy, to help build different kinds of jobs than what the two traditional economic drivers have given to our young people. So it will hopefully keep them home, bring them back home to perpetuate our culture and grow our community. So we've had lots of success. Jobs in what is declared the high-tech industry, the research, innovation sector have grown significantly. And
you have a tech park there, right?
We do. It's located in South Maui in Kihei. It's the Maui Research and Technology Park. The Maui High Performance Computing Center anchors that with lots of spin-off activity. And in the last 5 years, we've seen huge growth in the IT area. In fact, we are boasting of an IT sector that's doing a lot of work in medical research.
But Alan, it seems to me the business community has been talking about the extent to which the university can help Hawaii's business community as long as I've lived, 40 years in the state. Has that in fact happened to anywhere near the degree to which the business community wishes it would?
No. the business community would like to see the university have an even bigger impact, and that's why we're so thrilled to see M.R.C. here, because of her vision to help grow the innovation research part of the university, but also to help. She's helped the university grow in many other ways. I mean, she's improved the graduation rate of the sort of the underserved portions of the population, including the Native Hawaiians. She's helped us get through this recession by a lot of the buildings that have been constructed, over the last few years. And I know from First Insurance's standpoint, I mean, we continue to hire a lot of UH graduates and look to them to be our future leaders. But we think that there is a lot of untapped opportunity in the Hawaii Innovation Initiative. And it's something that we believe we absolutely need. We have $28 billion of debt for pensions and health care. One of the best ways we feel to solve that problem is to grow the economy. We're going to continue to need a strong tourism industry. We're going to need to keep the military here, but we need to add another sector. And if you look around the world, you look around the United States, the areas that thrive have great research institutions.
But I have to admit that you want to hire 50, as I see it, 50 hotshots or 50 leaders in their field, right? You don't get hotshots for the University of Hawaii salaries. Oh, I'm a historian, of course, but you know what they pay us. But what are you going to have to pay to? I know you got one, a fellow DeLong,
yes,
and from MIT, but these guys don't come cheap.
Well, it is true that if you are going to attract National Academy of Science members who are going to come here to teach our students and work to build a program here, it is not going to be an inexpensive proposition. But when you consider that if they really are very good and they can bring the research programs with them, because these folks are already established, they're not starting from scratch, they'll bring in at least a few millions, tens of millions of dollars, and that certainly covers the cost of bringing them here initially. But it's not, I would like people not to focus just on the number of people we might hire, because this is just a concept of how we would do it. The other part of it, of course, is growing our own. People that are already here that can work with these folks are going to have an opportunity to develop programs that they would not have been able to develop. Now, the best example I have for that right now is the Cancer Center, where we are suddenly finding that because we have a new facility, because we have some very highly productive investigators, and we have the designation as a National Cancer Center, people from around the world now want to come to Hawaii. Some of them, and I think our cancer director's got a very good idea here, get some of them to come for a year or so, get them to know our people, get them to help write grants, get them to develop jobs and products and processes here, and then they can go back and we'll still have that connection. Somebody else can come. And when you have an island economy, thinking this way of how do you continue to extract information and help from other places can be a very useful way looking forward. But one of the things I do want to say about the Innovation Initiative is it's not just about research scientists in the research university. It's about working in the community colleges and in the baccalaureate institutions to build those pathways, to create the opportunities. And one of the things I find very, very attractive about being here in Hawaii is we do have a vertically integrated system. We know, as you very well know yourself, Dan, we know how to take students from the community colleges through to a baccalaureate, or we know how to give them a certificate, or how to give them a 2-year degree that'll help them get a job. And we should get even better at that.
Right. It's actually music to our ears to hear the university president say that we can be a state-of-the-art, top-notch research university and still value the importance of the education and workforce development pipeline, that they're not mutually exclusive. Yes. To hear that the top-notch people that she's attracting, as well as growing our own, will be teaching our students. And I think that's really important, and not all presidents have that same mission and view, so we really commend her for that, because that's what we need in our community.
I am a little worried about spillover, though. I mean, I've been worked in the UH system for a long, long time, and it's Manoa-centric. And a research orientation is growing research. You can't argue with that. But that's the Manoa-centric activity.
Well,
and let me finish my thought for a moment here. How does that spill over onto Maui?
Well, see, that's directed to the neighbor island member of the panel. Yes, we have used the term Oahu-centric before. It has come from our, but because we are a system, and you just heard the president understand what a great asset and advantage that is, I think there's been a huge improvement in articulation from the community colleges on the neighbor island to completer baccalaureate degrees at Manoa. We're offering more baccalaureate degrees at the neighbor island campuses. The University of Hawaii Maui College is a great example of what can be done at a neighbor island component of the system, of the UH system. So we don't like to use the term spillover. We like to use the term that we're a strategic partner in growing the research component, because you know what, the neighbor islands are great test beds for a lot of the research that we've done, especially in clean energy.
John?
Well, I was just going to say that sometimes we look at the UH system and we look at it dispersed amongst the number of islands. And the way to look at it is as a virtue. I mean, we have one system. We can break people from all different islands, and we can stream them into Manoa or West Oahu or into UH Hilo if they're going to the community colleges. And this is what we're trying to do with the articulation that Leslie mentioned. And that means, articulation means basically if you take an engineering course at one of the community colleges, that's going to transfer to the four-year baccalaureate college, and there's not going to be a problem with that.
And
that was an issue in the past.
That was a big issue in the past, that's right. And I think there is definitely, I've seen that, more articulation agreements that work.
We've made progress on that. It's working in practice now. What the board would like to see done is that go from practice and a handshake between the community colleges and the four-year colleges into policy, so that it's going to be perpetuated into the future. And I think that's something we can do. And you were mentioning the idea of reform, and that is one reform that would be very important, I think.
Yeah, and let me just make another point, which is that while faculty are institutionally identified, the work they do on the big problems facing Hawaii takes place across the entire state. If you're doing climate change, it doesn't mean your research is happening in Oahu. It may be in Maui, it may be over on the Big Island, it might be at Molokai. And when that happens, the research project people are often people who are on that island.
Yes.
So it creates opportunities for them.
Now, you've worked with collaborations between business and the university, and where have they been successful? I mean, we started out, I think, I started off with the wrong question, in saying how much would you like to have, and where have they been successful that you think the university has really injected energy and new knowledge into the business sector?
Well, I mean, the Cancer Center is one area. I mean, First Insurance has worked for a number of years with the College of Business. And we've seen a big change there as Schuyler's College of Business has strengthened, become one of the top 25 business schools in the country. We've funded a professorship in risk management. So the university has shown it too is reaching out. Just as the business community recognizes its future is heavily dependent on the university has also sort of opened up to the business community, tried to understand our needs, and try to help their students get prepared to have rewarding careers. And part of the objective of the Business Roundtable is to develop an economy where more of those students can have careers and look forward to lives in Hawaii. Part of the interest the Business Roundtable has in all the work that M.R.C is leading is a few years ago there was a dinner, I think you might have been there, where they had a number of very highly motivated high school students. And they had them on the stage and they asked them what they saw for their future. And none of them envisioned coming back to Hawaii. They were all, so they're going off to the mainland to go to school, and they thought Hawaii is not going to provide them with the career opportunities or the standard of living they could have up there. And I think that the Hawaii Innovation Initiative has an opportunity to change that.
Absolutely. Organizations like HBR and the economic development boards across the state, I think what we do best is that we are a bridge, an intersection to bringing our industry members, our industry partners to actually into the education environment, to offer internships and practicums, to be mentors to faculty and to students, to show the emerging job opportunities that are right here at home, that we have great things happening here that can compete with career pathways that might be attracting our students away, that we can hopefully change what was on the stage that night.
Just the other day, I was talking to the CEO of the National Space Foundation. Ironically, he's a Kamehameha graduate, a University of Hawaii at Manoa graduate, and he said he had to leave here because he had interest in space and he wanted to eat. And so he said, you know, he didn't have a choice but to pursue his dreams elsewhere. And he came back and he was explaining how this could impact Hawaii. And he was focusing partly on the Big Island, saying because of the landscape there, there's a lot of opportunity to try out technology that they would envision for space exploration, using three-dimensional printing on some of the materials that's on the Big Island to try to figure out how to construct housing or other instruments that they may need on a long space trip. But he also pointed out that in doing this kind of research, it would affect the university and the university faculty, but it also would create the space industry. It would also create jobs for contractors, welders, because they would need to create a whole infrastructure. So it goes beyond the university to the society at large.
Let me look at this just from a slightly different point of view. At the university, we have the National Cancer Center, we have the med school, we have the nursing school, we have the Daniel K. Inouye School of Pharmacy. Right now, the university is probably the one institution in this state, or one of a very few institutions, that is probably going to have to take the lead in innovation to change our healthcare system to make it affordable. And that is something that we have a role in. The medical school now has a role in, and we'll have to do it in the future. The National Cancer, the Cancer Consortium here in Hawaii was a step in that direction, and we have to go further. But that is one place where we have a role, a leadership role, and we should be taking that.
Well, and you know, you referred to yourself as a historian, and I know you are, but in the areas...
In a manner of speaking. In a manner of speaking.
Creating history as well. But the other parts of our university are also very important in helping to develop policy. Healthcare policy is one area, but response to climate change. Yes. How are we really going to plan for the future in an island where we can't just choose to move inland? We're going to have to really deal with it. What does it mean that the acidification of the ocean is changing? As David Carl, one of our science faculty, likes to remind me on a regular basis, every fourth breath you take is the consequence of the microbes in the ocean. And that is something that our scientists are the leading experts on. So every fourth breath, you might not want it to be only 3 breaths instead of every 4 that you want. So these things are actually important, and it's not just the nerdy science, it's that they actually impact the behavior. And to the extent that Hawaii is a relatively unique environment because we are so isolated, we don't want to put ourselves in the situation where we have to bring in expertise on energy or bring in expertise on, we want to grow it here. Right. We want to be sure we can do not just the work, but also the implementation here.
But Alan, I was quite struck that the head of that National Space Agency didn't go to Rockefeller University. He went to the University of Hawaii or Vassar. Let's just
We've
point,
noted there are quite a few like
just
that.
Point that out. But someone wants to know what research areas or opportunities in research are at Manoa. What are well, I want to change this. Callers from Manoa. I want to change that question. We know about things like oceanography. We know about astronomy. Right. We know, but what are the new areas that you would hire these 50 people in, or that you say that you want to scope out and sort of feel where we should go or could go to get people that would help those areas that offer possibilities?
Well, okay.
Go ahead.
Well, part of that, of course, is going to be a continuing discussion of where we think we can place our, if you will, place our bets for the future. But clearly there are areas we are strong in that we want to keep strong. And those are some areas in the sciences like oceanography, astronomy, and energy. And also, though, the particular cultural expertise that we have. We do have the best Korean center in the world and a few other things like that that help us face the possible partners for the future. So those programs are just as key to helping to build these things as you might think of initially. Now, there are some areas we aren't good in and we don't have much strength in that are on the leading edge of the future, and one of them is informatics. How do you extract information, manage information, and handle gigantic data sets? And we happen to specialize in gigantic data sets, economic databases, astronomy databases, all of these other things. So we'd like to build that, and the beauty of that is if we get good at it, it is not a businesses spin out of it and are built there, and it doesn't have to leave. Right. You don't have to import, you don't have to export, you just got to be able to have access. Now, that's always a challenge, but.
There's someone twitters, please focus on local students compared to out-of-state students. I was an out-of-state student, showed up, decided to stay, chasing a local woman, came out. Went to school here.
Hormones are always stronger than brains.
Yeah, no, there's no question. In my case, there's no question about that. I'm sure that there's somebody over in Maui whose kid's going to the community college saying, "Hey, there again, they're talking about the research stuff, and by golly, we gotta put money into our local students right here in Maui."
Well, the university system is doing that very well. Maui just opened blessed a beautiful science center building, many years in the making, over a decade. That will provide state-of-the-art research opportunities for our students right on Maui. Students that want to stay home, students that work part-time and want to have a great education. So I think the system is building assets throughout the campuses, throughout the state. And the community colleges are clearly recognized for having their own strengths in areas of innovation. And they're all unique based on the unique cultural assets of their communities and environmental assets.
John, you were going to say something?
I was going to say that the way you put that question down was like there was a trade-off between local students versus students from outside. In fact, I don't think there is. I don't think we've ever turned away a student from Hawaii, and I don't think we will. In fact, we've just done something that I'm particularly proud of, in that we have now made it possible for local students who are not yet American citizens, came here with their parents, no fault of their own, or in the process of becoming citizens, they will attend the UH at an in-state rate. Why is that important? Well, first, it's the right thing to do, but second thing, it's important if they go to school here, they stay here, they become productive, why not? I mean, that's the American dream, and that's what we want to help people achieve.
Alan, someone wants to know, what can the business community do to support the innovation initiative?
I think we can support the university in a number of ways. We can partner with them by trying to help them attract some of these researchers, by helping you raise the issue of how do these people get paid. I think that's part of what the hospitals have done. I think partly is try to show them the opportunities, try to make this a better business climate, so that because you're going to be bringing in a lot of people with a lot of creativity and initiative, and helping them to show that there is an opportunity here to fully capitalize on their ideas and talents.
We've got to get to a little governance, and someone asked, Barbara and Kailo asked, why did the Board of Regents release another $200,000 for the investigation of the Stevie Wonder affair?
Okay. Actually, it was $260,000.
$260,000. A honest man, this John.
So
punishment.
you know, sometimes the Stevie Wonder was a mess, and it was a fiasco, and there was a lot of mistakes made. But one mistake we made was calling the advisory task group Phase 2, because then they see it as a connection to Stevie Wonder. In fact, this task group is not related to Stevie Wonder. We are not investigating Stevie Wonder again. What we are doing is something that we needed to do and should have been done probably a while back. And that's, we're starting at the top. That means the Board of Regents and the people who report directly to the President. We're going to look at the responsibilities, the authorities, the delegations of authorities, and then we're going to go around and we're going to talk to these people. How well does this work? And the people who are going to be talking to them are independent, and they're looking to see where are the problems. What do we need to address? Is the policy really working? Does it make sense? Are too many people authorizing one thing, as in the case of Stevie Wonder, so that no one was responsible? There's lots of things you can look at. We need to do it. We haven't done it in a long time, and we're going to do it right now. And that's what that advisory task group is. $260,000 sounds like a lot of money. However, we have folks who are going to be volunteering on that. It's less expensive than it would have been otherwise, and it's the right thing to do.
You know, I have to say that in preparing for tonight, I was not aware that anybody had said that we were among 54 to 67, somewhere in there, among the university's research-oriented output in the country, better than universities in Oregon or Notre Dame or the University of Virginia were ranked higher.
And not far behind Berkeley.
And not far behind. But the problem with the Stevie Wonder thing, and the problem with this new thing that somebody's testified that there's been money's being wasted over in Hilo on the construction, is that it brings into question autonomy of an institution that is doing important and good work. What has to be done to see that that kind of thing just doesn't happen again, or happens so infrequently that it's not as stupid as the first one there? That's the one that...
Well, if you look at the Stevie Wonder affair, one of the two things that were really unfortunate. One is that after the investigation, we learned that everybody said they weren't responsible. So that was not good. Okay. The second thing is that then we went back and we had this advisory task group go through it, and they said something that was even more disturbing, that the controls were in place, the policies were in place, but people went ahead and did it anyway. Yeah. So why was that so? And that's a great question. Why is that so? We're going back, we're educating people, we're training people, we're trying to make them understand that policy makes a difference. You have to follow the rules. And we're going to do some more of that. But I also think there's something about this advisory task group that we're doing now. And that's, we start at the top and we look down and we say, how are we pushing that delegation down and making that authority down there and making people accountable? I'm the leader of a task group, and we're looking at our athletic policy. How's that for something controversial? And I think what we're trying to do here is we have a proposed rewrite, total rewrite, but the point of it is you push that delegation of authority down to the chancellor, who has to push it down to the athletic director, who's going to go after the coaches. And everyone is going to be responsible in their own way, and everyone will be held accountable, and it will be transparent. And the highest priority will be the students' health, welfare, and academic progress.
The important question to ask is, why are we dropping rainbows for warriors?
It does seem to get higher interest than some of the truth. It always does. Exactly right. But you know,
that's a good question too.
You know, Dan, your shows are always serious. So let me just make a serious comment here, and that is that, you know, we're all very sorry about what happened with the Stevie Wonder, and we've learned some lessons. But lost in the turmoil and the discussions about it is the fact that the university has an excellent record. Yeah. Its audits have been clean for 5 years. The external accrediting group came in and said that they thought we had done a remarkable job of managing through a tough recession, that we had, you know, we had not had some of the drama that you've seen around the country over a variety of issues, that we kept our focus on the Hawaii Graduation Initiative, trying to do the best we could with the CIP we had to do repairs and to be able to build new facilities, and that we started defining new goals and objectives for the economy. So, you know, I guess that what I've learned is it's so easy for those messages and those accomplishments to get lost when you have a lot of drama around an event. And it is normal for universities and businesses to try to reevaluate, re-engineer, transform, whatever the current buzzword is. And often these studies, which are done, and they've been done at Berkeley and North Carolina and Michigan and probably about 40 or 50 others, often it's Bain, McKinsey, or somebody like that that comes in, and that is not a cheap job. And frankly, I think we can do it just as well here in Hawaii without that kind of help, but by using the advice of some externally respected people here in Hawaii. And I think the board's very wise in doing that.
Let me just add something to that. Marcy's absolutely right. We do have a good record here, but we live in Hawaii. And the people of the state absolutely have a right to a board of regents that's transparent, that's demystified, how about that, and that is accountable. And we do, I think, as a board, feel accountable for what happened with Stevie Wonder and that mess. We're the buck stops with us, and that's where it is. But we are moving now to make this board and this university more transparent, more accountable, more understandable to the people of Hawaii. However good we are, however good we think we're doing, if they don't think we're doing well, we're missing the point. And we need to do that. And that is a priority of the board.
Well, I want to turn to another problem that it seems to me faces the university, and that's that this lady's done a lot of building, as well as the president who preceded her. And we've got a new campus at West Oahu. You've got a new science building. There's a new pharmacy building up over on the Big Island. The money is almost there, as I understand it, to finally take those poor folks over on the other side of the Big Island and out of that terrible shopping center and put them in a building. The cancer center. Do we have the programs and the money to in fact make all of those buildings and what goes on inside them go? I mean, I sometimes look at the buildings and I think I wonder whether that we really have that big a cancer research operation to fill it and use it, or is your science building enough? Have you got people to fill it?
Definitely. The student enrollment is up significantly and has been over the last few years. We have to have those facilities. We have to have that pipeline of young people because we have some of the most incredible science assets here. Our host culture is built on science and sustainability. We have state-of-the-art telescopes. We have the best viewing corridors to the heavens on the mountains on the Big Island and on Maui. We have a supercomputer. We have every platform of clean energy and renewable energy here in Hawaii, whether it's 3 growing seasons a year for biofuels or wind or solar, OTC, we have it. So for us not to exploit it, it's a missed opportunity. And I think our students are there. They want that science opportunity. We have faculty that are very dedicated. Of course, there's always a need for more resource sources. I just came from Japan, where the Ministry of Education put $384 million to make sure their PhD graduate students have global practicums as part of their PhD programs so that their solutions that they're building and their innovation has a global perspective. And we're in sequestration. So, you know, there's no question that resources are needed. But I think there's a commitment to the fact that growing our own talent and giving our students the platform for their solutions, homegrown solutions, are always the best solutions for Hawaii. And they're transportable to the rest of the world.
Leslie, what's the university doing for Native Hawaiians trying to get into the university? Do you have any, you worked on the Native Hawaiian issue, I know,
absolutely.
for quite a while.
We've tried to bring our STEM programs to our Native Hawaiian students to celebrate the great innovation in science as a part of their heritage and so that they can see the career pathways that are available today. One specific example of that is with the ATST, the new solar telescope coming online on Haleakala. There is a $2 million program per year for the next 10 years dedicated to bringing Native Hawaiian students into the STEM fields with great scholarship opportunities, great internship opportunities. I think it will make a big impact in bringing our Native Hawaiian students into science education.
And I think in a general sense,
yes.
the Hawaii Graduation Initiative has had a huge
yes.
impact, and we've worked closely with OHA and with Native Hawaiian groups on encouraging Native Hawaiian students to participate in higher education. And in some of our community colleges, the rate of Native Hawaiian participation in the program is actually higher than the Native Hawaiian population. Yes. And coming from a state where I spent 20 years trying to budge the needle just a couple of points, this is a remarkable accomplishment. Now, we also last year put into the community colleges work together to put together an associate degree in Native Hawaiian Studies, which is designed to help students have the background to be able to move into yes. science and technology fields, as well as to move into the cultural and language side of the Hawaiian Studies program. So that's brought in a lot of students, and we've really invested also in this year. We're not going to get all the money from the state, but the Regents did approve new investment in Native Hawaiian counselors and faculty yes. to improve this program.
That's the area I work in, is building the pipeline, yeah. so that our students don't track out of math and science in middle school where there's a huge leak in that pipeline, so that they are prepared to be enrolled in the STEM fields at the university, and keeping the engagement and making it relevant and showing that studying physics actually has an application to making us sustainable in energy and not overly dependent on fossil fuel, giving them hands-on experience. It's so important. I, too, am pleased to report that our programs reflect a higher percentage of Native Hawaiian students than the general population. We serve about 20,000 students statewide in a menu of STEM programs from K through 12, and we're about 36%, just under 40% Native Hawaiian students, and we're very happy with that number of participants.
That's terrific.
Very quickly, you asked, can we fill those buildings? I would bet you right now that in 5 years, UH West Oahu will be too small.
Well,
and Palamanui, 5 years after it opens, will probably be too small, and we'll be trying to just keep up with the students coming. And many of them at both of those campuses will be Native Hawaiians.
Yeah, I'm worried about other things too, though. I know that in the case of West Oahu, you know, moving from shacks with the staff that that takes care of shacks, suddenly you've got full campus, and suddenly you need things you never thought about before, like your own security, like 24 hours a day, like a much bigger bill for all sorts of things. She's heard all of this. I don't want to bother her with it, but it seems to me that often when you build newer and better things, sometimes the expenses just go up very radically even if you can fill them.
A business model for West Oahu needs to be thought through, and Rockne Freitas will do that. Well,
we're looking forward to him. I'll tell you, I am anyway. Although I'm just a lecturer now. I'm just a lecturer. That's all I do. Tuition. People want to know about tuition. The tuitions, we have 3 or 4 questions here saying, why is this tuition going up? What are the effect of the salaries of the UH administrators reflect on the raising tuition? Hey, you got to cut your salary more. What about, they want to know about what's UH stand on tuition for local students and more tech courses? I'm worried, I'm increasingly worried about the cost of tuition. My financial aid barely pays enough for me to attend the university. Can you please explain why the university tuition has to go up more? Go.
Okay, well, the fact of the matter is that this is a national issue. That across the nation, and there are many people who speak about it, including Norm Augustine, one of the great business leaders of the country. They talk about the fact that because of the great pressures that the states are under, for other programs they have to support, like pension plans, like social services, like K through 12 education, they have been spending less and less, and the data are very clear year after year on higher education. Well, higher education costs, although it is widely believed that the cost of higher education has actually gone up. In fact, the data show that in inflation-adjusted dollars, that is not true. The dollar amount has gone up, but the actual cost corrected economically is about flat. So what is happening then? What is happening is that the states are able to contribute less, and so the people who are getting the education, and some people, I'm not one of them, but some people believe that education is a private good, not a public good, and that people who get it should pay for it. That's been a big change in public policy thinking. I'm sure you know that, Dan. It used to be that we thought of public education as the place that we were producing a public good, that when people were educated, they contributed to the economy and they built programs. So unfortunately and very sadly, the Regents several years ago had to face the fact, really for the first time in the history of the University of Hawaii, that a serious look at increasing tuition had to happen. We had very low tuition, which is why when you see those percentage numbers, you should look at them with, you should look askance at them, because when you're at 1 and you go to 2, that's a 100% increase. So we try to emphasize the dollar changes. And while nobody likes to increase the amount of money that people have to pay for their education, we're not causing $3,000, $4,000 increases in a year. We're talking about hundreds of dollars. And yes, the tuition has gone up. I want to compliment the Regents for the fact that we have in place a 5-year plan. Most places do it every year. And you've seen around the country last year, some universities increased their tuition 10, 13% in September and another 10% in January. Yeah. Those sorts of things are very hard for families and students to plan for. Ours is careful. It was fairly low for the first couple of years. It never gets above a 7% increase on an annual basis over this period, and it's going to be re-examined about halfway through. So, you know, it's always hard to raise the tuition, but we have increased financial aid. We've quadrupled it. Many more students are getting the help that they need to go. And one of the tests of that is that the participation rates of Native Hawaiians, Filipinos, and other underserved groups are going up during this period of tuition.
Alan, how many people do you employ at First
300.
How many of them are UH graduates?
I don't know what the total UH graduates. Well, I know that over 10% of them graduated from Scheidler. And I know that we have a lot more graduate from other schools, but I don't know the total. Do you ever hear from them when you're talking to them about salaries, or when your HR people are talking to them about salaries? Do they ever talk about their accumulated debt from going to college? No, but that hasn't come up as a discussion. What we found, and part of the benefit we've had by building the relationship with the University of Hawaii, is that we've been fortunate. A lot of our students have gone back, talked to the people they've been in class with, told them that they like their job, and come to work for First Insurance. And so we found that as a pipeline for First Insurance, and every business has to continually do succession planning, is a huge asset to us. Because I think that the students understand, we all were students at one time. We all had to pay for it. We all, M.R.C. struggled getting to school, went to college, through Vassar, through a lot of help from scholarship. I think that people recognize that education costs and that it's beneficial.
John?
So I think everything that M.R.C. said is correct. And when the Regents voted for the tuition increases, we did that looking at both affordability and how we compared to other states and other universities. Having said that, when we had our testimony in front of the legislature, there was a lot of questions about cost. And we did not focus on cost. And I think that's something we should look at. And I think we're willing to go back and look at that. There's a second sort of looming issue out there, and that's the sequestration, and how will that affect Pell Grants. We really depend on Pell Grants. These are U.S. government grant and aid, and it's a big deal. We don't know what the effect of that is going to be. And we need to take that Pell Grant, whatever happens to it, into account when we look at tuition, because that is a direct effect on affordability and access.
Leslie, what a great question. What if Larry Ellison was in tonight's panel? What are the prospects of a shared vision, the man who bought Lanai?
Yes.
Now, you guys must have talked to him.
Well, I think we're in queue with most of the rest of the state to speak with him personally.
Yeah, she's about third in line, right?
Yes, I'm sure the university president has a higher ranking in the order of the line. We are looking at this as a great opportunity. Lanai is an important part of our county. Very bright students on Lanai that are, we're trying to provide access and tools in STEM education, and it is one of the most geographically isolated places on Earth, unique to do that, and so we're hoping Mr. Ellison brings a good heart for investing in that community of which he now owns to build capacity there, because we will certainly be his partner, and we have lots of suggestions where he can make investments that will have a big return.
If the university provides student services, and according to recent reports, the amount of student services is going down while the number of students increase, what's with the discrepancy? Where's the money going? Are we providing enough money for student services?
I don't think there's a university in the country that's providing enough money for student services given the changing populations that we're seeing. You know, there's a big issue right now. I just came back from Washington discussing what the level of services universities need to provide for returning vets. Frankly, we don't have the services to treat PTSD or any of the serious problems that people come back with. And we're trying to muster the resources we have. But the fact of the matter is that we are seeing more students in the university, this is not just us, but around the country, who have a need for counseling services, sometimes medication services, and some of them have some pretty serious, I guess I would call them challenges to the counseling service in terms of how the kind of services they need. And there is the question of, is this the university's responsibility to provide those services, or is that something we have to be in discussion with our counties and our cities, and for that matter, the federal government, about how we're going to service these students. It's very different than it was when I went to school, and probably very different than when you went to school.
Alan, I remember people telling me in the old days, that's how old I am, that the business community in Hawaii was not as supportive of the university as it should be, because so many of the people who ran those businesses had not grown up here, had not gone to the university, and they weren't really good patriots of it. They went off to the mainland to college. Is that the case today, or is that changing?
I think that's changing. I know from personal experience, because I've came from the mainland, that my impression when I first got here was not favorable. But our human resources VP, a graduate of UH, established internship programs with the University of Hawaii, with the insurance industry, not just with First Insurance. And she proved that there are great people coming out of the University of Hawaii, and that we've hired a lot of them. We're banking our future on a lot of them, and it's the reason why First Insurance has put over $1 million into the university in terms of professorships, scholarships, supporting Business Night, because we see a lot of talent. And I think a lot of other businesses in towns have also recognized that. Because when we first started the internship programs with the industry, there weren't very many internship programs around. And suddenly people began to realize that this was a great source of talent. And now there's a lot of competition to get those students.
That's a very good thing to hear. Did I feel you? I sort of felt you wanting to say something.
Oh,
Though I was looking somewhere else.
I was responding to what President Greenwood said. about as we're reaching out to make sure that our returning veterans get to access higher education and use our benefits. We know that 80% of our returning veterans are experiencing PTSD and have unique challenges in their integration back into civilian life. And so that is bringing a burden that we all must step up to and share, whether it's at the university level or in business, as we're all trying to hire our veterans. So I think it is, I'm sure, overtaxing to the University Student Services, and we all have to leverage, I think, our resources in that area.
We have just 1 minute left, and you have 15 seconds. Are you optimistic about the future of the university?
I'm very optimistic about the university's future, and the economic development boards across the state are partners in this initiative.
You're not bothered? Are you bothered by those legislators down there who might come down on us in a big way?
I hope they don't. I am bothered. I think that some of the things that they propose might really change the nature of the university and how it relates to this society, our society here, in that it will not be as autonomous or as independent as it should be, and that won't, and under those circumstances, it will not be a university. It should be.
Optimistic?
Very optimistic. M.R.C's providing a great leadership for the university.
I won't even ask her because presidents always have to keep smiling day in and go out and slog. I want to thank you all for being here. I think I think you've provided a very good view of where we are. Next week on Insights, the Hawaii State Legislature has passed the halfway point, the critical crossover when proposed bills either live or die. We'll have an update on which of the hundreds of introduced bills are moving forward toward becoming new state laws. Helping us make sense of the session and state budget will be the chairs of the House and Senate Money Committees, a veteran Republican state representative, and a political columnist. That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Dan Boylan. Ahui ho.